Ladies and gentlemen, I am here today with Ryan Dawson. Ryan is an author and a filmmaker whose most recent achievement is an Empire Unmasked, an absolutely incredible 5-hour film that really goes into the nuts and bolts behind what happened on September 11th. Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I want to say something about that 5-hour, why it's 5 hours, because I asked a lot of my listeners and people who read my work all the time, should I make it a series or should I just make it one long film? They said, don't Glenn Greenwald us, meaning don't trickle it in. I said, okay, I'll do it all in one chunk. That's why it's the size it is, but that's history. I mean, I felt like I actually was much longer and it got edited down to 5 hours, but
well, let me just comment on it for a second. 5 hours sounds long, but after having gone through the whole thing, the first instinct I had was to watch it all over again. Because I find that when you watch a lot of just documentaries in general, they're presented kind of like a dramatic movie. And it gives the audience time to pause and reflect. And the amount of information that you put forth in your documentary, it was like nonstop information. I mean, it's the kind of thing where sometimes you need to pause it and be like, okay, what did I just hear? And take some time to absorb it. I just couldn't believe the onslaught. I mean, anyone else probably would have taken that information and made it into multiple miniseries.
Oh, someone would take 20 minutes of my information and make a whole movie out of that. But I'm not really into the theatrics and the, scaring people with spooky music. And I mean, I've seen people make an entire movie just off Building 7 or something. And I'm like, just say it. Just say what you need to say. Because I have so much to say that I can't afford to make it cinematic. I have so much information that just crunching it in and hitting you one factor after another still takes 5 hours.
Let me ask you a question. When I talk to people about 9/11 and 9/11 researchers, the first thing I like to find out is what exactly were you doing on 9/11? Tell us about your experience.
Well, let's see. I think I was at my house when the first plane hit, and I was driving to school when the second plane hit. And I actually started explaining it to I had a psychology class that morning. I was in college, and I started saying what I thought the deal was, because I had actually already been coincidentally or serendipitously looking into PNAC, and in their August issue, they had a big fat picture of Osama bin Laden, and they were talking about Saddam Hussein and anthrax already. Just a month and a half even before 9/11.
Right.
And by the time I got home, they had already blamed it on Osama bin Laden. That fast, right?
It was very fast. And just to make today happens to be November 22nd. It's the 52nd anniversary of the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And there are so many similarities between Kennedy and 9/11 that it's really quite shocking to the average person. When it came to Lee Harvey Oswald, it seems like they said they had no information, had no idea this was coming, and then within a matter of minutes, they had all the information on their suspect. And it seemed like 9/11 was the exact same thing. Couldn't see it coming,
that's
have
the
no
thing
idea.
too. It's more similar than that because, Osama bin Laden had worked as Tim Osmond for the CIA. And Lee Harvey Oswald, under Guy Bannister, who was a liaison between the CIA and FBI, I mean, he worked in his cell. He was one of the anti-Castro Cubans, but he was actually, he was supposed to be a pro-communist, but he wasn't. He was a dangle for the Russians, and he was with intelligence, and he'd worked with David Ferry and the Civil Air Patrol and all that. So they of course they knew who he was, and of course they knew who bin Laden was. They worked with him in Afghanistan for almost a decade. But yeah.
It seems to be a common theme, pleading ignorance and then miraculously knowing everything overnight. That's just one of the many commonalities you'll find between JFK assassination and 9/11. But didn't mean to cut you off there. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, I think it's a great point you just made. I mean, it is the anniversary of JFK, and I would argue Robert Kennedy was assassinated as well. We know there were multiple shooters. I mean, our own Senate investigation into John Kennedy's murder concluded that there were minimal two shooters, but they never were very interested in who that second shooter was, assuming the first one was Oswald, then who's the other person, and they never really got around to figuring that out.
You know, and I'm glad that you mentioned Robert Kennedy, because that one seems to get swept under the rug so often. And when you just like Kennedy, when John Kennedy, when you piece together what happened that day, witness statements, ballistic evidence, it's apparent there was another shooter there, and it's Sirhan. Sirhan obviously was the patsy that day.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that Thane Eugene Caesars, who actually shot Robert Kennedy, I mean, if the internet had existed in 1968, that would have come out immediately. But, you know, Robert Kennedy had been prosecuting the mafia, and we all know that the mafia has overlapping relationships with intelligence agencies. He was in Mickey Cohen's old hotel operation there in Los Angeles. And a security had hired a man for only one day. That's who shot him. Witnesses saw him use his gun. I mean, I always say it like this. It's satirical and dark, but I say, okay, on June 5th, Sirhan fired his 8-shot revolver 13 times in front of Kennedy, hitting him 3 times in the back. That's completely impossible. John Pilger was there, very well-esteemed journalist from Australia. He was a witness to the RFK murder, and he was next to Sirhan, and a gentleman beside him was actually shot. He was one of the people injured. I mean, how does Sirhan fire in the direction of Robert and hit someone behind him?
Yes, absolutely. And he was 3 to 5 feet away at the time, but the shots to Robert Kennedy were point blank from behind.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a topic that needs to be explored more in the future. I want to get back to an Empire Unmasked, and there's
I skipped all the Kennedy stuff in Empire Unmasked just because it's a huge can of worms and it's another film. But
absolutely. There were a couple major themes that you talked about in Empire Unmasked. The first of which were the Anthrax attacks, which even back then, when I was very ignorant to the ways of the world, I was just a kid getting out on my own, basically, and even it caught me as strange as how we had anthrax attacks and then this seemingly unrelated or sold to us as unrelated hijacking of planes and all the tragedy that went down on 9/11.
Right. Well, I mean, with the anthrax attacks, for one, the notes on the letters said 9/11 on them. Secondly, they were mailed from the same locations as the hijacker cells in Florida and New Jersey, which is 10 of the 15 hijackers all lived in southern Florida, and most of them just prior to hijacking the planes lived in New Jersey, where same as the Israelis, by the way. And then suddenly we get these anthrax notes sent from those locations that said "Death to America, Death to Israel" on them. Gee, I wonder who did it. And they chased around Stephen Hatfield for a long time. He won a huge settlement worth millions of dollars. And they blamed it on Bruce Ivins, ultimately, who killed himself, allegedly. And another doctor at the Fort Detrick area, Perry Mixel, she killed herself as well, allegedly. And that was that. But it was beyond that, because they erroneously attached the anthrax attack to Iraq. And Iraq didn't even have anthrax, had nothing to do with 9/11, had nothing to do with al-Qaeda, and yet they claimed they had witnessed this meeting between the lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta, and just some senior Iraqi officials in Prague, which they called Czechoslovakia, even though it's the Czech Republic, which I find hilarious, because Dick Cheney was actually, in government when Václav Havel divided the country, but whatever. And there's absolutely no way that they had anybody witness a transfer of anthrax from senior Iraqi officials to Mohammed Atta, because 1, there was no meeting in Prague. 2, Iraq didn't have any anthrax. 3, al-Qaeda didn't have any anthrax. And when you trace the source of that, it was the Israeli security that said that. They passed that to James Woolsey of the CIA, total Zionist, who passed it to Gary Schmidt and William Crystal, who wrote it in the Weekly Standard, which was PNAC's media arm. All lies, all deceptions.
Let me ask you a question. How do we know the meeting in Prague did not happen?
I mean, the Bush administration even admitted that it didn't happen, that they erroneously had just bribed some college student to make up a story. I mean, that's not even, they don't even deny that. But at the time, before the Iraq War, after the Iraq War, they admitted it. But, that was the purpose, was to connect 9/11 to Iraq. And they compounded on the lies they made it sound more plausible because Judith Miller, who was dating Dick Cheney's chief of staff at the time, Louis Leibowitz, or Louis Libby, they call him, Scooter, said that they had mobile weapons labs. And Colin Powell, who's Secretary of State, went to the UN, and he had this nice speech written by George Tenet, who's a principal liar of 9/11 on architects. He wrote it for him, and he said, "Oh, there's these mobile weapons labs." And of course, the only evidence they had were these cartoon drawings of trucks. And he said, in these labs, they have anthrax. And he held up a little mock file of anthrax. And I remember Jacques Chirac challenged him on it from France. Ironically, my roommate's father was Jacques Chirac's English teacher. It was sort of neat. But and so then all of a sudden, the U.S. became completely anti-French. And my congressman, Walter Jones, is the one who is embarrassing. He's from North Carolina. And he said, we should rename French fries to freedom fries. It was all this anti-France stuff because France was opposing the U.S. story in Iraq. But guess what? France was right in that case. Now, they've completely 180 now with this socialist Hollande. He's completely Zionist and after Assad and everything else. But Jacques Chirac at the time was correct. And even Colin Powell kind of knew better, but he was just trusting his sources. And they really made him look like a horse's ass because, I mean, his chief of staff, Larry Wilkerson, came out and really lambasted these neocons. He was at the hearing when they were talking about the Office of Special Plans, which was this little like office within an office in the Pentagon created by Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl, who's the Defense Policy Board president. Where they just sat there and fabricated and cherry-picked evidence to create a war in Iraq. And if it meant that they had to link them to al-Qaeda, they would. And they did. And the main staple that connected Iraq to 9/11 was the Anthrax myth. And there were a lot of soldiers who went to Iraq, who signed up right after 9/11. We're going to Iraq because they did 9/11. And it was absolutely false. But to these 18, 19-year-old kids, it had been on MSNBC. It had been on prominent mass media in the United States that Iraq gave anthrax to the ringleader of 9/11, and none of it was true. They didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, biological or chemical.
It's as I listen to you speak about this, it just hits me again at how much research and time and dedication that you had to put in to this project to gather all this information.
Right, because when you look at 9/11, it's all Illuminati and Bavarians and just nonsense.
Right. And some of the misinformation we'll cover here in a little bit. My question is, what is it that really spawned you into this kind of research? I mean, on your YouTube channel, you have videos going back a couple years talking about Empire Unmasked. So what is it that what gets you out of bed? What gets you out of bed to do this in the morning?
My YouTube went back all the way to when it started. They deleted my channel. The first time I had a movie called War by Deception, and the day the ADL partnered with YouTube, they erased every single one of my videos. They never gave me a reason or anything, so I just started over. And I think I have 20,000 some. I don't know what the viewership is or whatever, but my first movie had about 1 million views. I re-uploaded it on Vimeo and everything, but my motivation was, I've always been political. I argued for a line item veto when I was in 5th grade, and I used to be really strong on Native American issues. Because I was always like the voice for voiceless people. I talked about Burma. I'm talking now about starvation in Yemen, but after 9/11, when Americans got killed, and actually even before that, with Waco and the Oklahoma City bombing, I got pretty hyper. But at the time, there wasn't much I could do because the internet was just a baby. And I tried to write op-eds, and I did, and they were in the little papers in Virginia and stuff. But it just was like, what's the point? I mean, it's not reaching enough people. But I felt like I'm going to try anyway. And then post 9/11 and the build up to the Iraq War, I was screaming till I was blue in the face that they don't have weapons of mass destruction. They're lying. There's no evidence. There's nothing. But there wasn't a Facebook at the time. There was no YouTube at the time. There wasn't even a MySpace yet. I had an AOL hometown page, so it was very, very hard to get the information out. And then on top of that, you had these evangelical style conservative radio hosts just screaming about complete nonsense. And so it's been a very uphill battle. But in the end, because my information was solid and I researched so well, that eventually, once people found my work, they never returned to where they were. So the Jonestown people, they'll come to me and stay, but it never goes the other direction. No one leaves me to go see, talk about Freemasons or something,
Right. And that brings me to the misinformation that's out there in reference to 9/11. I know that I spent years and years on Kennedy assassination.
There's a lot of dumb stuff on that too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Like the driver shot Kennedy and all that stuff. Now, when it comes to 9/11,
I dealt with that yesterday. I said, really?
There is.
You don't think his wife had any other opportunity to just poison his coffee or something? She's going to do it in the middle of a parade. Like, I know.
Right. The thing with 9/11 is when you go these days, YouTube has become the go-to spot for quick information. And that being the case, there is a lot of crap out there. I mean, what are some of the theories that have come out that you've completely debunked or that are just completely bogus? Or what pieces of information out there do you think were actually misinformation planted by the government or whomever?
For Kennedy or 9/11?
Oh, for 9/11.
For 9/11. Okay, well, I guess we'll start with the super ridiculous. I'm not kidding you, there's a space alien crowd, but I don't think that's that damaging other than, come on. There's the Judy Wood crowd with the dustification and miniature nukes that somehow only demolish one building each and don't leave radiation and just is so stupid.
Right. Let me pause right there because Judy Wood, the only thing that she has shown to me that I can't explain, and I would hope maybe you could, when she talks about the spire falling and disintegrating in midair. What's going on there?
Because the spire is still there in the 9/11 museum. If you go to New York, still sitting there. It just got under the dust and everything, but they still have it.
Oh, but it fell, and as it fell, it was dust coming off of it. Is that what you saw that looked like it was disintegrating?
It didn't disintegrate because I have photos of it still intact. Some dust fell off it or whatever. So what?
Gotcha. Okay.
It's sitting up on the top of that building. I'm sure it's gathering plenty of stuff, and it's falling through smoke and stuff too. It's not everything's visible from that high up until it gets condensed, but the spire is still there. Yeah.
And Judy Wood, she talks about these high energy weapons, like stuff that's straight out of Star Trek. That I just don't buy.
Actually, Star Trek had better technobabble than she does. She makes up words like dustification. Where like there's already a word for that. It's called pulverize. But that I don't think that's a big movement. I mean, people talking about holograms for planes and stuff. There's so much evidence of a plane. I mean, one of the engines went all the way to the ground. But they make the entire topic carry a huge stigma, and we all sound like lunatics if you talk about it. But I think the more damaging people are the ones who don't go that far off into right field they don't claim holograms or anything, but the kind of Alex Jones crowd and stuff, the sort of some of it is true and a lot of it's scrap and a lot of it's exaggerated. They're much more damaging with their disinformation. However, I don't think it's a government agency. I think it's just that people are dumb. And there are a lot of people that deny anyone died at Sandy Hook. And there are people who just every single event that ever happens less than an hour after, they're like false flag, fake crisis actors, without even looking at it.
Right. Even with Paris recently and Mali, the same thing popped up.
And there have been crisis actors, kind of, like the toppling of the Saddam Hussein statue. They actually hired people. Ahmed Chalabi, who ended up becoming the oil minister and vice president of Iraq, was there with a bunch of goons, and they were running around jumping on Saddam's statue and hitting it with shoes and things. And they had this tight shot of that. But as you panned out, you could see that armored vehicles had blocked off the entire park, and it was not an organic Iraqi jubilant scene. It was just people from the Palestinian hotel who they'd bust over there, who were part of the new government in waiting, who were sitting there doing that. However, that was debunked within minutes. Within minutes, they had aerial photos and showed it. When you do a stunt like that with actors, you get caught immediately.
Well, I want to comment on that for a second, because I've watched a ton of Sandy Hook stuff also, and that's one of the only cases where I'm like, what's really going on here? Because nothing really makes sense. And I think the biggest failure with something in particular like Sandy Hook is just the release of information. If the proper authorities and media outlets had released proper information, we might have a complete story on what happened. But I sit here today still clueless as to what happened there.
Adam Lanza shot a bunch of kids is what happened, but the problem was the media was in such competition to be the first people to report on it that in their haste, they made a lot of mistakes. First, they blamed his brother. They said Ryan Lanza, I think it was Adam. Adam was younger. They blamed his older brother, who wasn't even in the same state. And then they retracted on that. They said he took his own car when he'd taken his mother's. They had their guns wrong. They had a lot of little facts wrong, because that's how the media is. They're a joke. But they want to be the first ones to report. And so a lot of the stuff was false. But these people, unless they see the bodies of the dead children, they're in total denial. But you never see bodies of dead kids. They never show dead people in the news, period. The only time you saw footage of the school shooting was Columbine, and you saw it on the internet, not TV. Right. It's not even legal to show that on TV, and they don't want to show you that. But the idea that an entire town got together and faked that many deaths of those little kids, and just if those kids were still alive, would they just live inside their house for the rest of their life and never go outside? It's completely ridiculous.
Right. The whole thing sounds absolutely ridiculous.
They blamed. They said there was this photo where they had, was it the Parker family or somebody, was the sister, Emily, was alive, and the other one had died, and they had gotten the kids mixed up. Like, she's still alive, she's meeting Obama later. I'm like, that's her sister. It's her sister.
I don't mean to go off on tangents on all these other things that have happened, particularly Sandy Hook. But since we're on it, before I did this, I was a cop for almost 10 years. And I was a crime scene investigator. And when I look at some of the Sandy Hook information, I'm puzzled. I don't understand what's going on from my own personal experience. I
understand that, but that's because a lot of the information that's on the internet is just bullshit. They were photoshopping. There was a concentrated effort of disinformation on that. And all the gun nuts, and I'm totally pro Second Amendment. But all those people, it is like a cult, were just like, they're trying to take our guns, and they just fell for any story they were given, because that's the narrative that fit their ideology. But there was no mention of taking guns away after Sandy Hook, not at all. The kids had Asperger's, and he probably was on SSRIs like every single school shooter. And that's what no one wanted to talk about, these antidepressants that all these shooters on. We've had guns for centuries. But we didn't start having school shootings till we had psychotropic drugs in the mix. You're talking about just killing strangers. Every single case. The first one was in Texas, that prominent one, where they made the Pearl Jam made a video about it. Jeremy, I think the song is. But they shot a bunch of black kids, so it didn't make the news. And then the next real big one was Columbine, and that was huge, big news. Michael Moore did his baby on it and all. And then we had a gap for a while. They were all on Prozac, and then you started getting Paxil and Depakote and all these other serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And there is a portion of the population, this is my hypothesis, that what that drug does is that a lot of teenagers think of really nasty stuff they do to people, but they don't actually do it because a part of the brain comes in and goes, no, you'll go to jail and it'll ruin your life and it's terrible and immoral. But on these drugs, they just do it. They start, the fantasy goes, and all these kids, it's young, loner males in their early 20s, usually white, one was Asian, that are kind of isolated. Two of them had Asperger's, the kid in California and the kid at Sandy Hook. So they have some social issues. That kid at Virginia Tech could barely talk to anyone, Cho, whatever his name was. So people with social problems on SSRIs who are male and in their 20s and have access to guns in a no-gun zone end up shooting all their classmates and then usually killing themselves. The exception was the Aurora shooter in the movie theater did not commit suicide, but most of them commit suicide. And it's like they want their death maybe to mean something, so they kill a bunch of other people before they kill themselves. But all of them are on these drugs. And I think it's the drugs more than the guns. If it wasn't a gun, they'd stab them or something. I mean, they're still going to do it.
Right. With all this misinformation that has been put out in reference specifically to 9/11, you had made a video referencing the Pentagon, and you made a very good point that some people don't touch the Pentagon when they discuss 9/11 because it'll ostracize half of the 9/11 truth community right off the bat.
Yeah, and they're not concerned with what's true. They're concerned with numbers. It's like a business for people. And I'm not into business like that. I don't mind. I mean,
right.
It's fine to get paid for your work or whatever, but I mean, you can't sacrifice the truth for that. You can't say, well, I'm going to say something unpopular, so I'm going to walk the line here. And Richard Gage was one of those people for a long time, and Alex Jones was like, oh, we don't know about the Pentagon. We've got a better argument with Building 7, so let's just ignore it. And yet he didn't ignore it because he promoted loose change and Fetzer and all the idiots that say a missile hit the Pentagon, which is ridiculous. The plane was still there. There's a giant 90-foot hole in the first floor. And what these films did is they did a tight shot on the second floor only, and they acted like there's only a 16-foot hole, which is a complete lie. And then, yeah, obviously a plane doesn't fit in a 16-foot hole, duh. But it's not a 16-foot hole. That's just the second floor. It's a big hole in the first floor, problem solved. But so you get all these architects and engineers and stuff that come out on behalf of the missile idea. That's because their preliminary evidence is wrong. They think, well, it's a tiny hole. Plane doesn't fit in a tiny hole, therefore it didn't happen. And yet it's not a tiny hole. Loose change did not show a single photograph of the first floor. They cherry picked every single photo they showed. Always had smoke or whatever obscuring the first floor. It wouldn't show that there's a giant hole there, and they wouldn't show all the debris. They lied to people and say it evaporated, and it can't evaporate. It's impossible, which I agree. It is impossible, and it also didn't evaporate. Both engines were still there. Most of the plane was there. They recovered more from Flight 77 than anything other than Flight 93.
Well, let me ask you a question. I know you're familiar with the citizen investigation team research that was put out. In reference to the north side approach. What's your take on the north side approach information?
Stupid. I mean, they act like the plane has to physically contact light poles when it doesn't. Light poles are designed to fall over. I grew up in Hatteras Island, and they fall over during storms just from the wind. That's on purpose, so because they assume a car might run into them, and so they want it to give way in case a car comes, and they fall over in 70-mile-an-hour winds. When you have an airplane going minimal 300 miles an hour, it's going to blow them over. It doesn't have to run into them. And they're like, look how long the wings are. And I'm like, it doesn't have to touch it to knock it down, dumbass.
So do you believe that the north side approach was the most likely approach, and that could also account for the knockdown light poles?
Yeah, it knocked the light poles down, but it didn't have to run into them. But it doesn't hinge on that. All the plane was still in the building. There's a giant plane-sized hole in the building. They got DNA from every single passenger that was on that plane except for the baby. There was bodies still there. I mean, They just lie about all that, and they won't show you any of the pictures of it or video of it, because when they do, and even when you do, they're like, oh, that's a fake video. Oh, they planted those parts. Like, seriously, this is their story, that they crashed a plane into the building, and then some team went around throwing burnt up engines and plane parts in there, faked all the DNA, got all the EMTs to go along with it, got all the firemen to go along with it, got all the police to go along with it, got all the employees in the Pentagon to go along with it, risked anybody getting a video of it. No. How about a plane hit the building? Problem solved. They definitely use planes to hit New York. Why would you do this switcheroo? Plus, where did the plane go? It flew right over 395 and 495, super busy highway. It's not like the Pentagon's back in the backwoods somewhere. It's in the middle of Washington, D.C. The interstate's right there. It's always packed with cars, especially at 9:30 in the morning. You have 144 witnesses see the plane go to the building, 0 see it fly away from the building. Like, what do you think? It's just turned invisible? And
let me cut you off right there. What about the statements made by Roosevelt Roberts that he was at the back loading docks and he saw a plane 100 feet away flying off? I mean, that was listed in the Citizen Investigation Team documentary that they made.
Yeah, did you see what they did to those guys? They sat there and browbeat people to death until they would agree with what they said. They sat there going, no, it couldn't be because of this. No, it couldn't be because of this. So they did that England guy. They just sat there until the person is like, fine, and gave them what they wanted to say. But you're still going against 144 witnesses, and like the engines were still there, DNA evidence of every single person, a giant hole. That's why the roof collapsed. The roof didn't collapse over a tunnel. It collapsed over a giant hole where the plane hit the building. There's no motive to not use a plane. It's if you're saying the government did it, why wouldn't you just hit the building with a plane? Why the hell would you make the plane disappear somehow, David Copperfield style, and then switch it with a different kind of plane or a missile fired from what, by the way, and then go in and plant plane parts, plant DNA, and then you still have to kill all the people who are on the plane. Otherwise, you're going to have all their family members just going along with it for the rest of their lives and no one talking. It's a stupid, stupid story. It's just these people, they don't give a damn though. It's just it's all spookadoo stuff, and it's the same to me. It's the equivalent of blaming the New World Order or something. And I don't do dumb shit like that. I give you the specific names and why they did it and who did it. Plus, you have the phone calls. Of course, they say they're fake because you couldn't have cell phone calls. Well, they're on the airphones, idiot. That's what they're designed for. There's no reason to fake 32 different phone calls. You have to know who was going to be on the plane from their tickets or whatever, tap their phone so you get sample of their voice and stuff, and then fake a live conversation with their loved ones who know them better than anyone. It's dumb. It's beyond dumb. It's dumber than the stuff they said about Kennedy. The umbrella man and all the rest of it. But that kind of nonsense has a sustained springboard. There's no reason you and I should have ever heard of that stuff because it's that stupid, and yet it has such a presence online. And why do you think that is?
I don't know.
I mean, you even have a huge presence for people saying there are alien lizard things that can, like werewolves, can turn into people or look like them. I mean, and you've heard of that, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah, me too. Why have we both heard of that? Because that's so dumb.
Yes, it is, but maybe that's not why it's in mainstream media, but on a medium like YouTube, where anybody can post anything. I guess that's one of the downsides of having information.
No, they interview these idiots on CNN. Fetzer's been on there. He's a hologram person and stuff. David Icke has been on. That's who they go and interview. They don't want to talk to someone like me. I'd kill it on mainstream media. I would start talking about Omar Bayoumi and the financial relationships between the CIA and the hijackers and all that. They would be scared to death to have someone that actually knew what they were talking about. They go right to the alien people because they make us all look dumb.
And it does discredit the movement as a whole.
It hurts it. And what's sad is David Icke actually has some information that's true. And he mixes it with whatever the name, Dracos or whatever the hell he calls those lizard people, which is based on the old Unaki story. Is some biblical bullshit,
Mm-hmm.
which also gets popular on YouTube, but it's the History Channel too. The History Channel's gone in the toilet, and I know this for a fact because my twin brother's an archaeologist. He found the lost colony with another archaeologist, Mark Horton, who dug up Genghis Khan and is a well-established archaeologist, and they found the very first British colony in America. And the History Channel came down to do a piece on it, and they were talking about all this nonsense about the Dare stones. There are no Dare stones, by the way. They say related Virginia Dare. 45 stones were found right after the play was created in the 1930s, all by 4 people. It's so dumb. But History Channel and Discovery have been reduced to sharks and Hitler. That's all they can talk about.
Right. Okay. So back to 9/11. Another major part of your movie, Empire Unmasked, is focusing on the dancing Israelis and their activities. For those who are unaware, can you go ahead and give us just a brief overview of what happened with the dancing Israelis?
All right, so right after 9/11, there were reports from the Jewish Daily Forward and Army Radio and ABC and some of the local Fox affiliates and stuff, and then some other reporters like Counterpunch and Antiwar.com, Christopher Ketchum, Justin Raimondo, good muckrakers, serious journalists, about these dancing Israelis, where apparently witnesses had seen 3 guys at Doric Towers, just right across the water from where the World Trade Centers used to be, filming and celebrating the attacks of 9/11. And some of the questions was, when were they filming? Was it before or after the first plane? And why were they celebrating? And these 3 guys worked for a moving company, and they got in their moving company van. One of the witnesses wrote the license plate down. She waited till her husband came home before she called the police, though. And these guys were pulled over later in East Rutherford near Route 3, and there were 5 guys in the van at that time. So the 3 who had been dancing, they picked up 2 more. One was the brother of one of the dancers, and then another was not. Their names were Sylvan Kursberg, Paul Kursberg, those were the brothers, Yarn Schmel, Oned Eldner, and Omar Mamari, who was the youngest. And they all worked for this company called Urban Moving Systems. 2 of these guys, 2 of the individuals, had already been listed on the counterintelligence list as Mossad agents, people who they were looking out for espionage. That would have been the 2 brothers, I deduced. And their moving company ended up being a front for Israeli intelligence. Still, you could still say, well, maybe they're just spying on the hijackers because why wouldn't Israel spy on the Arab terrorists? Of course they would. I mean, duh. But if they had known something, how come they didn't tell the U.S.? Or maybe they did tell the U.S. and the U.S. just ignored it or looked the other way, or was just incompetent. There's a lot of ways to go at first, right? However, Freedom of Information Act in 2011 revealed a lot more on the story, and I finally got hold of the full field investigation reports from New York, Miami, and New Jersey. And oh boy, you look at the interrogations of these guys, and their stories are all over the place. They definitely had foreknowledge, knew about it, celebrated it. And one of the most damning, condemning things is one of them saying, hey, come up to the roof and take pictures with us. They're about to take down the second tower.
Oh, wow. I didn't even hear about that.
Yeah. And Mamari's the one that admits this to the police. This guy cried and broke down in an interrogation, and he'd only been in New York a couple of weeks. He wasn't really tight with the other 4. The only reason he was with them is because they had been in the army together, and he recognized them. So he was at their house in Brooklyn the day before. He happened to be with them when they got arrested, and he honestly thought that when the Israelis said they're going to take down the second building, he assumed that the authorities in New York demolished the building on purpose, so that it wouldn't fall over and kill more people and damage. They thought they did a controlled collapse so that it wouldn't tip over timber style and land on a bunch of buildings. That's what he honestly thought, until he was in jail and saw the television that night and realized that no, they were saying fires took it down and the authorities didn't take it down, which made him wonder, wait, why did they tell me they were about to take down the second building, and how did they know? And when you look at the cell phone records confiscated from the vans, right at 9:55, all 3 phones are making calls. 3 minutes later is when the second tower collapsed at 9:58. They're basically going around not only telling the people at Urban Moving Systems, but their buddies. There were 5 different moving companies, but they were calling around saying, hey, they're about to take it down. Hey, they're about to take it down.
Now, let me ask you about the Urban Moving Systems, and I believe there were some other front companies, Magic Heating and Plumbing, I believe was one of them, that were determined to have been Mossad fronts. How was the connection to Mossad made through these companies?
Okay, well, first of all, there are 4 other moving companies, and the first one was connected because a notebook confiscated in the van had phone numbers for them, one of them being Classic International Movers. And a van from Classic International Movers was pulled over 2 miles from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 went down, where they miraculously found the passport, which is not impossible, but it's pretty improbable, of Zaid al-Jarrah, who, by the way, his voice is not on any of the black box recording or flight recording, and none of the witnesses who made calls mentioned 4 hijackers. Every single one of them only said 3. But what was funny is a few months later, in 2002, in January, Zaid al-Jarrah's first cousin was busted as an Israeli spy in Lebanon. He had been spying on Hezbollah since the 80s. And that guy's brother was also busted as a spy. So 2 of his first cousins were spies for Israel. So that was Classic International Movers. Then you have the White Glove Movers, because a woman who lived with the Kurtzberg brothers in Brooklyn worked over there. Then the police went there and found out that was all Israelis. And so there's this big nest of moving companies who, by the way, had been going in and out of the World Trade Centers, supposedly moving furniture. Hired by Zim Shipping Company, which is 50% paid for by the state of Israel. They relocated to Norfolk. They broke a massive lease to do it, and yada, yada. However, Dinko Mechanical and Magic Heating and Plumbing was discovered completely differently. I think it was in February 2002. The FBI had been watching a woman at the DMV in Tennessee because it had nothing to do with 9/11. It was because she was just selling IDs, because Tennessee is used to be one of only 2 states where you didn't need a social security number to get a driver's license. So a lot of people did that. California and Florida, the other targets for other reasons. And so they were watching her for that. And it just happened to be when they decided to pull a sting on this lady that she was meeting in the parking lot with 6 guys. A lot of reports say 5 because one of them was underage and they leave his name off. But one of these guys was named Khalid Odala from Jerusalem. He's the one, he actually sold Catherine Smith her car, the DMV worker. So they had a tight relationship. And of these 6 men, one named Sakura Habad, his cousin was working there too. He had on his person a card for Magic Heating and Plumbing and another card which was a pass to the World Trade Center to do work, dated September 5th. And they had a trial. His father produced a letter from this guy named Sergei Davydenko, who supposedly worked for this company called Dinko Mechanical, no relation to the company of the same name in Canada, by the way, who had hired him to do work in the World Trade Centers on fire suppression systems. Well, of course, he just ended up being... there wasn't even a business address. It was an obsolete residential address. An Israeli citizen. He was living in New York. He had a partner named David Connell. I have the district attorney of New York's indictment of both these individuals. Apparently, they had been doing work in numerous buildings with fake master fire and plumbing suppression and licensees. So in order to get that license, you have to work under somebody who has a license for X number of years, and they had fabricated reference letters and documents, and so they were not qualified to hire anybody to be working on anything in any building, much less the World Trade Center, which did everything in-house, and the men working for them weren't qualified either. So instead of working to fix the fire suppression systems, obviously they were working to break the fire suppression systems, and none of them worked on 9/11, by the way.
Is that what you believe they were? Is that what you believe they were doing? Was tampering?
It had to be, because they weren't qualified to fix them. Wouldn't have known how to do it anyway. They're in jail. I mean, all of them were thrown in jail, and Denko and Connell were indicted and thrown in jail too. But guess who got out of jail the day after sentencing without any explanation? Just went back to Israel, and his partner got out on a $250,000 bail, $250,000. Just what kind of plumber has $250,000 laying around?
Right.
Yeah. And I found out where that money came from too. But
where'd it come from?
Same group that bribed the police commissioner of New York $250,000. Airtime Wertheimer, who's an Israeli billionaire. The police commissioner, Bernard Kerik, who was also thrown in jail for fraud and working with the Gambino family and the mob. He had been in Israel in August 26th through 28th. He met with Airtime Wertheimer. But this is very suspicious. Instead of handing him $250,000, which is already bad, he gave it to this guy named Stephen Witkoff, who gave it to Kerik's wife, who gave it to him. So there's several intermediaries instead of directly giving him a loan. There's no terms on the loan. There's no date to pay it back. He never paid any of it back either. It's a bribe for the police commissioner. Duh. Mm-hmm. And it's because he wasn't only the police commissioner. He sat on several prominent boards to deal with like real estate and things in New York, and guy's not educated. He can't even speak proper grammar or anything. But he's the one that lies later about the dancing Israelis arrest. He admits arrest, but doesn't admit explosives, even though every single mass media outlet reported that they found bombs in a van. It could have been a second van too, but.
Now I do want to touch on that. What the van that was found under the George Washington Bridge, correct?
Near it. It was in the Meadowlands. But they just say the George Washington Bridge because that's where it was going. And
now, what kind of explosives were found?
RDX. Plastic explosives.
And let me ask you this: when you listen to experts on controlled demolition, like Danny Joanko, who has passed away, I guess, in 2013 of a car accident, he talks about a really skilled team, precision guys, experts in their field, knowing what they're doing to be able to bring down buildings like that. Now, obviously, these dancing Israelis didn't do the demolition themselves, so what would be the connection between them and the people who installed the explosives?
Well, it's just the access in and out of the towers by having a moving company. You can use the moving company vans to do that. That's all.
But what I'm asking is the team that actually installed the explosives. If you listen to Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers from 9/11 Truth, he goes into the red and gray chips and the nanothermite.
I think those guys are ridiculous. Nanothermite is ridiculous. Thermite's nothing but iron oxide and aluminum mixed together. You had aluminum planes in there. There's also bits of iron and aluminum in asphalt when it heats up and up. Finding thermite on the nano level is like being shocked that, oh, look, there's broken glass next to the concrete. Of course you're going to have nanothermite. That's completely meaningless. Thermite is not a good cutter to use. It doesn't have a good timing mechanism. You can't have it pop out floor by floor like that because it's completely erratic. I've made it before. I started making this stuff when I was a teenager for an anarchist cookbook. It was shape charges, and it doesn't take a genius to put shape charges. And I don't believe there are explosives on every floor. They were just blowing out the parking garage under the lobby, and that's evidenced by video of the lobby with all broken windows and the panels busted off the wall and everything, and witness after witness after witness talking about explosions down below. I mean, Stephanopoulos, mainstream media reporters were saying the entire subway was full of smoke. If the planes are hitting up 90 floors above in the sky, why is the subway full of smoke? I think the original plan was, just like in the World Trade Center attack of 1993, you can't really get access to the lobby of World Trade Center. I mean, it's full of people. It's open all the time. You can't just walk around and plant shape charges. It's impossible. But you can do it in the parking garage, which is where all you have to do is have a car with it already in place and then go drive it, leave it there, and walk off. It's pretty simple. But they didn't have enough or something, because although there were a lot of explosions heard and there was smoke filling up that whole area and they did shake the lobby, it didn't cave in. The plan was probably to have the lobby collapse into the parking garages below, and so that everybody in the World Trade Center would have been trapped between where the plane hit and the lobby. They wouldn't have been able to escape, and it would have been more like 50,000 deaths instead of 3,000. However, the lobbies did not cave in. Most of the people did get out of the building. Those who were stuck above where the plane hit, they were screwed. All of them died. And of course, the people on the plane died. But basically, everyone else had time to get out. So it could have been a lot worse. And there were 2 other planes that they attempted to hijack, one on 9/11 and 2 on 9/14, that never made it. They got all 10 of them got arrested. Flight 23, Flight 299, and Flight 133.
I think those are flights that most people haven't even heard of. I hadn't heard of them until I watched Empire Unmasked.
There's a lot of stuff no one's ever heard of unless they've watched Empire Unmasked. But yeah, Flight 23, they tried to hijack, got arrested. Police, I mean, it was on television, but it just kind of got forgotten. And there was another plane that ran into a bank in Florida on September 12th. I don't think that's in the film. I mean, because I couldn't prove that it was related. It may have been just somebody that saw 9/11 and got motivated by it, did it on their own or whatever. I don't know. But these people definitely were involved because they had fake licenses from South Florida, all the same MO. But what's strange is 9 of them got released. Why?
That is the question, isn't it?
I know why, because they're handlers, because our CIA wanted it to happen anyway.
I will wrap up the talking about the thermite. I just have a couple more questions for my own clarification. There's a really good video, Decade of Deception, put out by 8911 Truth.
I made a video called Decades of Deception, and then they titled it that. That's Rebecca Roth.
I'm assuming you've seen that one?
I saw as much of it as I could stomach. Total nonsense. They go into the gelatin bee thing, totally the Vienna art students and stuff. And that kind of stuff really hurts, because there definitely were art students from Israel who were involved in tracking these and shielding these 9/11 hijackers, Hanan Sarfati, etc. But that had nothing to do with Wolfgang Gardner and stuff. That had nothing to do with what was in that film. And then they get into total nonsense with the planes and everything. And just
my question is, and from what I've seen, because obviously I only have the information presented to me to filter, and I haven't seen anything to the contrary of this. But there are clips that they show of Tower 1 falling with explosions going off above the impact zone, and then they talk about the debris that comes out at one trajectory and then changes momentum and picks up a new smoke trail that goes in a different direction from a new source of impulse. And it's pretty convincing when they present it in the manner that they do, that this is all caused by the thermite reaction.
That wouldn't even be caused by a thermite reaction. Thermite's like an acid. It just eats through stuff. It doesn't. Those buildings were blown up, beams going sideways, like blocks away. That's shape charges. But I think it's silly it's splitting hairs to me. Like when someone burns your house down, you don't sit there and bicker about whether it was by kerosene or gasoline. You want to know who the hell burned your house down.
Well,
I'm going after who did it, not what kind of bombs they used.
Well, I think the implication is if it was brought down using this nanothermite that they theorize, then that had to come from U.S. government or some sort of military laboratory. So I think that's the angle they're going with, that if this was the material used, it had to have been complicity on this level.
Nope. Any government can make it. And like I said, it's sporadic and unreliable. You need a really high heat source to get it going, and it's not going to shoot beams sideways. Thermite just eats through stuff. That's all it does. You usually need magnesium or something to light it with, unless you can over-oxidize the area and lower the specific heat before you do it. It didn't happen. They weren't going around on every floor planting spraying thermite. It's stupid. I don't know how to tell a non-science person how dumb it is, but it's really dumb.
But you do believe that there were charges all throughout the building?
I
Or
think
at
they
least
had them
on
below the
certain floors?
lobby in the parking garage for sure. And it seems like from some witnesses that something went off in the mechanical room, but you don't need every floor. Maybe every 15 floors or so, you need to shake it to make sure all of it comes down. But there's no purpose in lighting a bomb on every floor. And it would be really hard to do. I mean, there are offices and people there, and where? Just sit a bomb in the wall or in the elevator? I mean, there was a broken elevator for over a month. So it is possible. But to me, from looking at the physical collapse, and this to me is the weakest part, because there are many things that could all have the same conclusion. And I'm not really worried about the science and physics of the building, because I have all this overwhelming evidence of politics and history. I mean, people caught with bombs. So I'm not scratching my head about what kind of bombs were used when there's a foreign intelligence service caught with RDX in a van full of bombs. I mean, goddamn, they have passes into the tower illegally, got arrested and thrown in jail. So did their handlers. Nancy Israelis got arrested. They're filming the first plane hitting. They're talking about the second building falling before anybody knew it was. They're celebrating the first plane hitting when most people thought that was an accident, not a terrorist attack. They followed him around all through Florida. There's all these financial connections. You have the anthrax witnessed by Israeli security. It says death to America and Israel on the notes. And we end up invading Iraq, which was Israel's policy from day one. It's not a mystery to me at all. But they don't want to talk about that because you're not allowed to talk about Israel. I mean, none of these people talk about the occupation of Palestine and home demolitions or any of that either. Richard Gage actually told my friend Josh the reason that he wouldn't talk about Israel is because it's bad for the brand. This asshole collected $10,000 to put up posters in New York subways. It doesn't cost that much money to print some posters. They just pocketed the money. And that's what these charlatans do. Alex Jones is the biggest televangelist ever. He's just making money off of 9/11. They don't give a damn about the families or anybody that died or the Iraq War. They never connected the Iraq War to the Office of Special Plans. Never. They didn't talk about it. It was for oil. Exxon didn't lie about Iraq. BP didn't lie about it. It wasn't Chevron talking about it. It's the Office of Special Plan. An office within an office in the Pentagon created by dual citizens with Israel who sat there and lied about anthrax, about mobile weapons labs, about Niger forgeries, yellow cake uranium. Every single lie about Iraq came from Israelis, moles in our own Defense Department.
Now, you go over this connection to Israel and why it's so important in Empire Unmasked. Give us just a little bit of information on summarize, if you can, the connection you make in the movie and why Israel the relationship seems to be so important to our government.
It wasn't just Israel. It was Saudi Arabia and the CIA, too. They're all under the umbrella of the Safari Club. But I just focus on Israel because they screwed up the most, so it was the easiest to get evidence on them. But there's plenty of evidence of Safari Club founder, nephew, Prince Turk's nephew was what we call Bandar Bush, and his wife had used Riggs Bank to wire money to Omar Bayoumi and Osama Bassan, who gave it to Mavid Naket, who gave it to Al-Hazmi and Al-Midhar, who were the two hijackers who lived in San Diego. Omar got their apartment for them, and they were on Flight 77. I mean, so it's not just Israel. I want to point that out. It's just my focus is on Israel because they're the ones who screwed up the most. So it's easier. That's the only, that's all. And no one said death to America, death to Saudi Arabia. I said death to America, death to Israel. Right. And they're the ones that wanted the war in Iraq. And the war in Iraq is a much greater crime than 9/11. And we killed 1 million people. 1 million. Most of them kids, too.
Now, let me ask you this. The majority of the alleged hijackers were Saudi in origin. Is this Safari Club how they were able to...
their passports were from Saudi Arabia.
But they were not... Were they Saudi citizens?
Some of them were. Some were from Yemen. Some were from Egypt. One was from Lebanon. But Al-Qaeda is real. I mean, there's definitely terrorists who want to kill Americans. Just not that hard to find.
Let's talk about Al-Qaeda.
But they're
for
not
1
independent.
second.
They're totally an outfit from the CIA and have been from their inception.
You're talking about Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, from the Mujahideen.
Well, right, exactly. What I've gathered about Al-Qaeda is that Al-Qaeda was really they were recruited by bin Laden, trained by the CIA to fight in Bosnia, and that is what Al-Qaeda was, the base or the database of CIA-trained recruits.
That's correct. Yep.
How did that become this massive terrorist organization, or is that just a myth?
Because I guess the name Al-Qaeda was new because they didn't refer to them like that until after 9/11, really. But I watched a great interview with Hamid Karzai, who talked about how he had come across all kinds of rebel fighters and Taliban in Afghanistan, but he had never come across Al-Qaeda. And basically what I got from that was it was just a myth or a name that's slapped generically on terrorists around the world just so we can kind of associate. And I noticed a lot of these terrorists it's like ISIS
nowadays.
Right? Like,
it seems like they just like to throw it in there to connect them, and nobody's in Al-Qaeda anymore. They're all Al-Qaeda associates.
Yeah,
so
affiliates of Al-Qaeda, right?
Right.
And that's, okay, so there's a civil war in Afghanistan between 3 factions, the Northern Alliance and 2 different Mujahideen groups from 2 different leaders. And within one of those Mujahideen groups, we created what's now called Al-Qaeda, but they didn't call them that. And it was just a group of foreign fighters, mercenaries, like ISIS. ISIS is the FSA. Duh. ISIS is just like Iran-Contra, but I'll talk about it later. And so these foreign fighters, which had the wealth of the bin Laden family, very wealthy construction and a lot of money, and they're getting fighters from Saudi Arabia, from all over the Middle East, to come to Afghanistan to fight the communists. But the real motivation was to fight the atheists, because in their mind, communism's anti-religious. They're not really motivated. They don't really understand the wrongs of economics of communism. It's religion. Same like in Vietnam, the slogan was "Kill a commie for Christ." They were motivated to kill them because they thought it was a war of religion, not because they thought it was a failed economic policy, although it is a failed economic policy. But their main motivation for the guys pulling the triggers was this is anti-Jesus or anti-Muhammad or what have you. And so they had these fanatics in there, and they were financed through BCCI, which is a bank created in Pakistan by a Saudi businessman, Prince Turki, who is the founder of the Safari Club, which was set up by George Bush Sr. when he was the director of the CIA. And it's got William Shatley and all the regular other assholes in there involved. And so BCCI and the ISI of Pakistan, it's like Pakistan's CIA, were training, arming, and financing this clique within the Mujahideen, and that was bin Laden and his boys. And when they needed them in Bosnia, when they needed them in Kosovo, when they needed them later, also in Afghanistan, of course, they used them. Al-Hazmi, one of the hijackers, he was in the USS Cole bombing. He fought in Bosnia. Yeah, he fought multiple times, and the CIA was okay with it as long as they're fighting America's enemies. By that, I mean the corporate hegemony of the West, the Russians. And so what you have is a system of privateers, and I explained that in the movie too, how terrorists are basically modern privateers. And if people don't know what a privateer was, it's kind of like back when there were a lot of pirates. Pirates are terrorists on the water. They attack boats or towns, they steal everything, and they sail away. The English started attacking the Spanish this way, is what they covertly would pay pirates to loot and plunder Spanish targets, but not English targets. And they'd protect them. But they'd act like they're policing them, but they weren't really policing them, kind of like we do with ISIS. And if the Spanish caught one of these privateers, there would be no connection to the British Crown. They would just pretend to be pirates, and the most they could do is catch them individually, have a trial, and hang the pirate. Now, if a British warship attacked a Spanish ship, it would cause a war. But if a pirate does it, they can get away with it. So they just constantly have pirates harassing the Spanish who are on the payroll from the British. That's how terrorism works today. Most of these modern terrorists, from Jandala to MEK to Al-Qaeda to ISIS to Al-Shabaab, FSA, al-Nusra, al-Fatah, Sham, and just pick one. They get money covertly from the CIA. Now, the CIA, however, usually cannot just pay for that directly, because we're supposed to be against Al-Qaeda and all these crazy people. We were supposed to be against the Contras. They killed American journalists. They had child soldiers. They raped people. They did all these horrible things. So the American public was against them. Congress actually, passed resolutions condemning them. So they weren't going to aid them, weren't going to help them. We're not going to be affiliated with the Contras. That was the public policy. The private policy, which we found out, this is a fact. We already had a trial, convictions, everything. The Reagan administration with Casper Weinberger and Ollie North and Poindexter and these guys were covertly financing the Contras privately the entire time. Publicly, we were supposed to be against them. And they did it in two fashions. One was illegal arms sales that involved Iran and Israel. The other was the illegal sale of narcotics, which Gary Webb blew wide open. And they were pushing crack and cocaine into Arkansas and into Los Angeles, principally. And it wasn't the CIA selling the drugs, it was Nicaraguans selling the drugs, Contras, but the CIA hooked them up, helped them get cargo airliners with TCA and all that, and looked the other way on purpose. And that's what's going on today with all this opium and heroin, $65 billion a year in trade from Afghanistan. That's why we're there. We're not there for women's liberation or anything like that. I joke about that, but they actually said stuff like that. We've been there longer, 14 years now, and we haven't built anything. I mean, we just blew up a hospital last month. This is terrible. But that is how they finance the proxy forces. And you have to have proxy forces, just like the reason England couldn't attack Spain is because Spain was stronger than them at the time. Because countries have nuclear weapons now, it's mutual annihilation. The only way to pick at them is through terrorism. And that's what they do. But you can't, in the world community, you can't say, hey, we paid terrorists to attack. You have to do it covertly. And you even have to have the finances covert, because as nasty and prejudiced as our Congress is, if you said we're going to give a few $1 billion to Al-Qaeda, they would say no. They attacked us in 9/11, you can't give them money. So that's why they have to use the narcotics trafficking. And they have been. And there's no real sincere investigations in this. Look at ISIS is selling all this black market oil. How? They don't have a pipeline. They don't have a seaport. They have to be going by convoy. You going to tell me you don't have a satellite photo of all this? And then you look at their trucks. Any organic rebellion would be all different types of models and years and different cars of whatever the people happen to own when they rebelled. They have uniform, same year, Toyota trucks, all the same paint jobs, color, brand new paint, artillery pieces in the back. As the Joker said in Batman, where do they get these wonderful toys?
Yes, yeah, and just to comment really quick and wrap up the drug trade involvement, I think the most damning indicator is that when we were in war in Vietnam, the Golden Triangle and that part of the country was the lead importer of opium and heroin. But as soon as our interests shifted to the Middle East, so did that drug production as well.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And the Shah was part of that. His brother owned poppy fields, got busted by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and the FBI intervened and said, no, let him loose. I mean, that happened all the time. They did that with the mafia too. It's why, a lot of the mafia, I'm talking about the Italian mafia right now. The reason there used to be all different kinds of ethnic mafias, but the Italian one ended up ahead of the others because after World War II, Mussolini was against the Sicilian mob and as a power rival, and so the U.S. allied with them to fight the fascists, and in turn left them as mayors and governors of townships all over Italy, and so they had state sponsorship, the Italians in the U.S. And so it's no wonder they got ahead in the five boroughs in New York, and so Meyer Lansky and Costello and all those guys, Lucky Luciano. Lansky was Jewish actually, but most of them were Italian, and they had state sponsorship. Now
let me ask you this: let's bring it back to 9/11 and the involvement of the United States government. A lot of people probably including myself, would like to blame members of the Bush administration for being involved or being complicit or having foreknowledge. What's your take on that? How involved was the Bush administration themselves?
They were involved. They were heavily involved in their war in Iraq. But kind of like Sheikh Mohammed made the plan for 9/11, most likely not bin Laden, with Ali al-Zawahiri. And the plan was to ram a plane into the Pentagon. But it quickly got expanded and much larger than that. They had the Bojinka plot before that. They were going to hijack planes from the Philippines and crash them into the West Coast. That was going to be even larger.
Wouldn't they anticipate that our air defense would not allow that to happen?
No, because they're commercial planes, so they just wait till they're almost at LAX and then just take a turn and run into buildings. I mean, they would anticipate it after it happened, but the first time you do it, you can catch them with their pants down. So they thought. They got caught before they even pulled it off. But the principal architects in 9/11 that decided that, look, let's let them succeed. In fact, let's assist them, because this is good for business, was the counterintelligence wing of the CIA. And that was
so you believe it was an organic plot? You believe it was a real organic plot that was picked up and fostered?
Yeah, they've always been trying to attack the United States, but the CIA had wind of it, and there's so much evidence. I mean, the CIA were following these guys around. They had Mohammed Atta's phone number. They had his phone tapped. They had the hub in Yemen tapped where other hijackers were. They had the entire Hamburg cell followed around. They knew about them. They knew when they came to the U.S. They refused to tell the FBI about it. It was George Tenet and Cofer Black and Richard Blee. Those are the three guys, the main Bush administration suspects on our side of the pond, who were involved in 9/11, knew about it, knew where the hijackers were, followed them around. Now you have two scenarios. Either they thought they're privateers because they had always in the past been fighting our enemies, even though they were still terrorists and using terrorist tactics. So supposedly, if you kill Russian civilians, that's okay. It's not, by the way, but either they thought that and they thought they could control them and they got double-crossed and they're just really, really incompetent. But then you have to explain why didn't they tell the FBI and all these other mistakes. Or they knew about it and didn't care, because you're talking about trillions of dollars. We can replace the Cold War with the War on Terror. They had all their slogans memorized, and then, lying about anthrax, lying about Iraq, all the lies that came post 9/11. And you just can't blame that on incompetence. They did it on purpose.
Now, do you believe that George Bush himself was aware, or was he just a puppet?
He's an idiot.
He was just the face of the administration, huh?
An idiot. I mean, no, they didn't let him in on it. That would be really... He had no clue, and he just relied on what he was told. I mean, that guy, they didn't have to worry about him. Cheney, on the other hand, is different. Dick Cheney, and the reason I say this, and he was a jerk for a lot of other reasons, but he's like, yeah, but would he kill Americans? Yes. He was in a POC bunker, and he made sure Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, because he tried to say he was talking about Flight 93, and of course you've heard the Mineta testimony saying the plane's 30 miles out, it's 20 miles out, the order still stands. Now, because Rumsfeld couldn't be found and Bush wasn't there, and Cheney had the order switched to himself, it's usually the Joint Chiefs of Staff, suddenly it's the Vice President, so he's the highest member, it's his call. The default is, no, you cannot shoot a commercial airliner unless you're given the order. So it wasn't an order to shoot down, it was refusing to give him an order to shoot it. And because he would refuse, he's like, no, of course the order still stand. The order was stand down. And so they didn't hit it, and it ran into the Pentagon. Now he says, we were talking about Flight 93, and yeah, we were going to shoot it down, but then the passengers took it down on their own. Happened to have a judoka on the plane, Jeremy Glick, the very accomplished martial artist, screwed it up because they were supposed to hit Building 7 with that plane most likely. But anyway, it couldn't have been that flight, because that flight was never 30 miles, 20 miles, much less 10 miles away from anything.
Right. Well, let me ask you about Flight 93. Flight 93, I really don't recall you talking about a whole lot in Empire Unmasked as far as the specifics of it. What's your take on what happened with 93? Was it shot down?
No, the passengers took it down. I mean, there's no reason to shoot down your own plane that's supposed to hit a target like Building 7 and then pull an audible and blow it up and make it look like an idiot. Because that's a disaster. Plus,
what about claims that an engine was found 8 miles away? Could that have happened?
No. The engine wasn't found 8 miles away. Debris was found 8 miles away. Huge difference.
Now, if debris was found 8 miles away and the plane had just gone down all in one spot, I mean, did it bounce that far?
No, I mean, the plane blew up. It was a cross-continental flight, and so it was full of fuel. And, I mean, you're just talking about tiny little pieces, and that happens in plane crashes if it's windy and you have a big explosion and things go flying up in the air. That can happen. It was also on the hillside. And it's just one report from one guy saying that. And, okay, you found some little piece of whatever, aluminum or something from a mile away, fine. But, I mean, the engines were both there. They recovered 95% of the plane. They have the black box. They got more of that plane than any of the other planes. And, of course, loose change, just like they did with the Pentagon thing. They were showing distant shots of the charred hole and stuff. There are even some morons that said, hey, look at this Google Earth image of it. And the date was 1998, and they're like, see, that hole was already there. Google Earth didn't even exist in 1998. They don't bother to check this stuff. Some dumbass sees a meme on Facebook and believes anything. But I think the reason they don't want to talk about the phone calls and admit that the crash was taken down is because most likely Al Jarrah's passport was planted there. There is no evidence that guy with 2 Israeli cousins in espionage was ever on that plane, other than finding his passport. And it was an Israeli moving company van caught 2 miles away from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which couldn't explain why they were there. I mean, that's the side they're trying to obfuscate with a bunch of stupidity, saying that, well, some say there was no plane. Some say it was blown up in the air. Then why is there a hole in the ground full of plane parts and dead people? I don't know.
Well, you kind of touched on something. Now let's ask the question. Some people believe that some of the hijackers are still alive. What's your take on that?
That's because multiple hijackers stole identities, and the people whose identities they stole are still alive. But the proper conclusion, when you find that, oh, look, like Omar Bayoumi is a pilot in Saudi Arabia or something, was not that Omar Bayoumi was still alive and didn't hijack the plane. It's, he stole that other guy's passport. That's all. If I stole your passport and then went and killed a bunch of people and killed myself and they found your passport, it wouldn't mean I'm you and I'm still alive. It just means I took your passport. That's all.
Well, we've covered a whole lot of information today in the movie in Empire Unmasked. Like I said, 5 hours long, should have been twice that length. Phenomenal movie. Anything else that you want to talk to the audience in reference to that movie, sir?
Well, I just want to say it's not just 9/11. There's a long history going back all the way from the Banana Wars on that talks about narcotic traffic and all that. And it's got a lot about Syria and ISIS in there. We've got I explained a lot on Iran-Contra, because I think it's vital for people to understand that too. And then, of course, the Iraq War is a good hour on the war in Iraq and all those deceptions. So it's more than just a 9/11 movie, but all those events are connected. And you don't need a separate hypothesis for each one. There's just one large theme that fits with everything we've been doing from the 30s to now. It makes perfect sense. I really encourage people to get the film, and that you won't need to see another 9/11 film ever again, because it just tells you what happened. And I'd really like to work on a Kennedy film next, because I just didn't have the time or money to do it. But I've been reading books on that for the majority of my life, and I'm eager to put out a film on the Kennedy assassinations.
Ryan, you've got a great YouTube channel with a ton of information on it. Where can people go to buy Empire Unmasked?
They can go to the Anti-Neocon Report. It's ancreport.com, and there's a buy now button on there. And I know people are pirating it, and that sucks, but it's inevitable. I would like it to be free. Look, if you can't buy Empire Unmasked, you don't have any money. There's a film called War by Deception that I put on YouTube that is free. It's about 2 hours of a lot of the same information that's in Empire Unmasked that gets to the core of it. If you're just into the 9/11 part and some of the aftermath of Rock and Anthrax, War by Deception, there's an hour and 20-minute version and there's a 3-hour version. They're both free on YouTube. You can watch them right now. But I am asking for people to pay for Empire Unmasked because that's how I finance all my future projects, and it's been a decade of my life, seriously, researching all these things, and it's been a real headache because there's so much disinformation from Jonestown, and it's just really hard to pick through all that stuff, and a lot of flack. I got a lot of haters, but I would get my ass sued off if I was wrong about any of it, because I'm not talking about vague stuff. I never say criminal elements or NWO or elite or anything like that. I talk about people's names, and I use real documents. I don't just say I have the documents. I read them to you. And so I really encourage people to get the Empire Unmasked. But if you don't have any cash, just go see War by Deception. It's free.
War by Deception is a great supplementary movie to Empire Unmasked. I watched it before I watched Empire Unmasked, and I highly recommend everyone go check it out. And I also recommend everyone go and support Ryan, spend the money, buy Empire Unmasked. Ryan, you've also got some shirts and some other things for sale on your site that people can help support you with too, right?
Yeah, the shirts are helping myself and some other activists in the Los Angeles area about a number of things, and that ranges from protecting animals. I mean, a lot of activist type of things. We're splitting that. They're my shirt designs and all, but I sort of donated that over to help some other people. I really want to network and help others where I can, and it's a dual project there, but there's some nifty shirts there. I have one of the Hiroshima bomb that says it's not terrorism when we do it. You're living in Japan, that hit close to home for me there, because it's just, there was no justification for the bombing cities twice with nuclear weapons. It was utterly ridiculous. But yeah, people can get that. People can get Empire Unmasked. People can donate just for the heck of it if they like, but a lot of podcasts on that channel all the time, and I really appreciate you having me on the show and watching the documentary and letting me defend the movie and go through these questions and deal with this information, because I think that's absolutely vital. And I really think we're at a corner now after these Paris attacks. People want to know about ISIS. They want to know what's going on. They know they're being lied to, and they are starting to catch wind that a lot of the alternative media is full of shit.
Well, Ryan, you've put in a whole lot of work, and anything else that we here at Anonymous headquarters can do to help you, you just let us know. You've got a mouthpiece anytime you need one.
Hey, that's awesome, man. If you could if you could somehow hack into Dick Cheney's wheelchair and make it do a jump like the movie Gremlins, that would be pretty cool.
That would be. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thank you, Ryan Dawson. And that's going to do it for me. I'm your host, Alek Heidel. And till next time.